Welcome to Crop Talk, brought to you by Innovative Ag Services, and this is our Field Scouting Special. Each week from March through October, our agronomy team shares timely, boots-on-the-ground updates from across the IAS geography, so you can make confident decisions as the seasons change. Today, you'll hear a quick regional update from our IAS agronomists, including what we're seeing in the fields right now, what to keep an eye on next, and a few practical scouting reminders you can put to work this week. I'm your host, Nicholas Giesman, and this week on Crop Talk, we're going to get into a little late season scouting, looking for more disease, what pressure we're having, and how to handle that. But we're going to get things kicked off with a little update from our Western region. I'm going to kick it to Nick Thompson. What do you got for us?
Thanks, Nicholas. This is Nick Thompson over in the Ellsworth location. Wrapped up fungicide last week, at least those that were doing first passes. We're still out scouting for disease, as that's not going to go away until the crop's out. But in terms of disease pressure, I would say around here we're sitting pretty good. There was a lot of fungicide that went out, and I feel like that stopped a lot of the outbreaks that we could have had. As you walk through the fields, you'll still see some gray leaf spot, maybe some northern corn leaf blight. But the biggest thing that I've probably been noticing the past week has been bacterial blight, which we can't do much about that at this stage. So right now, my biggest pressure is probably going to be bugs. The bugs this year have been very strong in this area, specifically Japanese beetles, but there is some heavy corn rootworm beetle pressure that in maybe some corn on corn fields or just notorious fields for having corn rootworm in them. As we reach the milk stage, we're about 4 inches above our year to date average in terms of rain. And it's kind of tapered off from the wet June and July that we have had. We got some rain earlier today, but it only amounted to about 0.3 of an inch. So for right now, we're sitting pretty good in terms of there's a lot of moisture underneath the ground, but I don't see a whole lot of areas in this area that are just completely ponded out. That's everything that I have here for the west side, and I'll kick it over to Owen on our northwest.
Thanks, Nick. This is Owen Heatland from the Cleves location covering Hardin, Butler, Grundy, and Franklin counties. I echo a little bit of the same thing. Got good growing condition. Corn and beans both look pretty good. Have pretty much finished up first pass fungicide. Do have a couple guys going on second pass fungicide, but the rain the last week and a half has made that really, really tough. Some going on with airplanes, some waiting. As far as scouting goes, have not seen a ton of disease, but with the rain and the heat we've had, extended periods of leaf wetness, I would anticipate that we would see tar spot start to come in. It has been a later season disease around here, which has meant it hasn't caused as much damage in the past years, but it's something to continue to look for. Haven't really found any of it yet, but I do anticipate that, most fungicide was on, we're looking at 28 days ago, 21 to 30 days ago. That residual will start to run out and we will start to see some disease show back up. But especially early corn, as we get into dough stage, we probably start to run into a time frame when it's beyond where a fungicide is going to help us. So it's something still to definitely look at as we scout and then know the maturity of the corn. Have also started to see a slight amount of nutrient deficiency as we've been not saturated, but wet most of the season. We've had another 2 to 2.25 inches in the last 10-ish days with rain predicted for pretty much the next 7 days. It's something to look at. And then, as Nick said, lastly, we are starting to see insect pressure. Most of the bean fungicide was sprayed with an insecticide, which seems to have done a good job, and don't see a ton of aphids, but mostly Japanese beetles and then rootworms in corn. And so as you're out there looking at corn, the biggest thing to look at is rootworms, more in preparation for next year. If you continually see extended diapause, which is the biggest issue around here, something to think about moving forward is a trade on bean stubble, an insecticide on bean stubble, or maybe a corn soybean rotation to get rid of that extended diapause, and just knowing which fields have it, which fields don't, so we can make a plan for the future. Other than that, I think the crop in this general area looks pretty good. So with that, I will move it on to Aaron.
Thank you, Owen. I'm Erin Recker out of the Masonville location. I cover Buchanan, Delaware, and parts of Fayette and Clayton County. We have gotten our fair share of storms the last couple of days. There's a good stretch with hail damage and some downed corn from the wind. I didn't see much for green snap. I'd say most of it was goosenecked. But even with it being goosenecked, we need to remember that that corn plant is now going to focus its energy on throwing those brace roots down to try to get it back up instead of using it towards grain fill. I know that they're calling for some more storms later this week, but hopefully it will be minimal. We are getting fungicide wrapped up at the airport. For the farmers who haven't put a fungicide on yet and we're contemplating on doing one, if you got some hail damage, it might be a good idea to get some fungicide on to try and help keep that disease pressure as low as possible, especially because that corn plant will be more susceptible to it now. As always, if you have questions, feel free to reach out to your local agronomist. With that, I'm going to pass over to Nicholas in our Southeast region.
Thank you, Aaron, for that update. This is Nicholas Giesman out of the Cascade location, covering Dubuque, Jackson, and a little bit into Jones County. Kind of the same thing Owen, Nick, and Aaron said, talking about not a lot of disease pressure right now, but definitely I think we're getting set up to see some tar spot rolling here. There's the gray leaf spot, there's the common rust out there, but I definitely see it's going to be coming in a little later this year, kind of like it has the last couple of years. Bugs, most of our fungicide has been sprayed with insecticide. But looking out there, there is some more rootworm beetles flying around the corn now, more aphids, some more Japanese beetle, like they said. But for the most part, crops are looking really good. I know the excessive amount of rain, you are seeing some deficiencies in nutrients, like Owen said, a little bit of nitrogen, a little bit of sulfur. Stuff's just kind of showing up with all that moisture that we had all season. But looking really good going into the last, few months before harvest. So I think it's a really positive, note going in through August here. Owen, how do you manage the second pass? If you're out looking for disease and you start to see something, when is your cutoff to do we go back? Do we not go back? What's your thought on making that call?
So I would say around here, probably maybe the end of this week or beginning of the next week. I mean, the biggest thing you're looking at is crop stage and maturity of the corn, because I'm assuming we're talking mostly about corn. So I would say later corn is probably going to pay better, and then every year is different. So we've got some trials out there, to see whether it's going to make a difference or not. But some guys are on the thought process of I'll just use two generics because that will be cheaper, and I'll just plan on spraying it twice. Some guys are using a branded and then a generic to keep costs down. So there's a lot of different things to look at and try. But really, what you're trying to do, the thought process, the goal is on a late corn is to extend the photosynthesis of that corn as long as possible, so you extend the grain fill and create a larger kernel, heavier test weight, better standability, assuming that that late corn will be the last corn you combine. And so you need it to stand until November. You don't necessarily want to combine 14% corn in November because you're going to have a head loss. So the biggest thing is planning out even preseason, what your maturities are, when you're going to harvest them, and then you can start to plan on what would you spray a second time. As I've told many customers, I can't tell you that I would spray 100-day or even 103-day twice with fungicide, but I would probably spray 114 or 115-day, which is pretty darn late around here. Now, in Cascade and Ellsworth, maybe it's later than that. That's a question for you guys. Do you have anybody doing a two-pass, and what are they looking at, or how are they thinking about it?
There's definitely a few growers that are, and some are running that generic two products, so they're running the generic up front, coming back and putting them together to run that over the premium product first or generic second. A couple guys that are worried about standability to harvest are making that decision now to hey, we're going to go spray, like you said, spray our these fields that are going to be last. We know we're not going to get there probably till November if everything goes well. So they want standability, so they're not sitting out there having down corn. So I think there's some guys doing that. I just looking at the weather going to the fall, I just wonder if there's if disease starts to come in here next week, are we going to see some more late season corn that's going to get harvested late? Does that call get made? I think that's going to be in the next few weeks. We'll see if what happens there on that side of things.
Yeah, over here in Ellsworth, we don't have a whole lot of people that go with the two pass system. A lot of times it's kind of a game time decision on what's the pressure out there? How bad is the pressure? And kind of like you said, Owen, crop stage, because we don't want to be combining green corn in November. For the most part, what we've been seeing has been looking at the weather in advance. A lot of the disease that I've seen pop up right now seems to do a lot better in the hotter temperatures. And looking ahead here, we're going to have a lot more colder and wetter conditions. And I haven't seen any of that disease really popping up around in this area. Shockingly enough, southern rust has popped up here just north of Ellsworth, just hasn't been very widespread. And at this point, we've done a few 2-pass fields, but it's mainly been on a case by case basis.
The other thing that I didn't really touch on that the 2-pass system allows you to do is better control bugs. So if you're in a long-term corn on corn rotation and you've got a bad beetle problem, that allows you to spray early for bugs and then spray again later, really stretching out that window of residual, because we all know that a beetle will start. I saw some already first, second week of July. They'll come out of the ground all the way until probably September, to be honest. And so anything you can do to stretch out and reduce that load of beetles or rootworms in the soil for next year is a good thing. So that, making that second pass allows you to do that. So some guys will maybe time their fungicide a little bit more on beetle control so they can kind of kill two birds with one stone.
Yeah, I think that's going to definitely be an option if you are throwing a second pass out there, or that's going to drive a second pass. Because I feel like, I don't know how all you guys feel when you guys were scouting for this first pass fungicide that we've done in the last 3 weeks. Not a lot of pressure. So did the flush already happen, or is it still coming? I think it's still coming. So I think a lot of guys that are, maybe on the fence on the second pass, that might be the tipping point to say, hey, we're going to go control some more bugs and then have the fungicide in the tank as well. So I think that's definitely something to keep in mind and look at.
Yeah, I would agree. As we scouted for that first pass fungicide, you saw some beetles, but not very many. But as we've scouted just to see how that fungicide was working and timing for a second pass, the beetle population seems higher now than it was at that point. So that allows you a little more flexibility of when to use your insecticide.
And I think with going with another second pass, as we kind of mentioned earlier, with how wet it's been, we are starting to see some deficiencies pop up. That also allow you an opportunity to throw in a foliar fertilizer if that benefit you at this point, just to kind of get you through the rest of the season without having any of that deficiency showing up for the rest of the year. But I do have a question for you guys, because I've noticed the fields that I know had an instinct or an end serve or some sort of stabilizer go out on them. Some may have a deficiency popping up on a plant by plant basis, but for the most part, they look far more consistent in not having these deficiencies late in the year than the fields that didn't have those stabilizers involved.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. Whether the stabilizer was, spring or fall, I think that the rain happened late enough that it didn't really matter what kind of product you had and when you put it on. Honestly, even side dress, we were just wet enough for long enough that in areas you're starting to see it. So I would agree that it seems like the instinct definitely did a good job of, combating some of that. Now, as we continue to get rain in August, there's not a lot you can do about it anymore, but I think it really protected it early on and helped hold on to that nitrogen as long as possible.
Yeah, I would second that as well. I think just seeing more consistency, kind of like you said, Nick, it just seems, if you had a stabilizer out there, it held on just a little bit better. So having a stabilizer in the tank, whether it was dry, 32 anhydrous, whatever product, the stabilizer seemed to make stuff just a little bit better, for what we're seeing right now.
I think that also brings up another good point as far as scouting goes is, as you start to see those deficiencies, or if you see those deficiencies, a lot of them you're not going to fix this year. And we know that whether it's a zinc or a boron or a potassium, I mean, we can put a foliar in if you're doing a second pass, but that's something to, note and think about as we move forward into the 27 crop year of what does it look like I'm short in and how do I start to remedy those situations. That's why it's always good to continue to do some tissue sampling towards the end of the year, because it will help you determine what you need to do for the next year.
I don't think that could have been said any better, because I think right now is the time to see where you're at in August, what's out there for your crop to take up. Fixing it. If you need more sulfur, to put that on with your dry fertilizer or spray it on. If you use Style or the plant or whatever you use, it's a lot easier to get it on with those products than it is to try to supplement in season, late, trying to pick up something. So knowing what you are deficient in and then taking that information, meeting with your agronomist and making a plan to tweak your fertilizer recs or whatever to make sure you kind of can combat that for next year.
And I'd say it's kind of the perfect time for it, because I know a lot of us are hitting the countryside, talking about fertilizer and how we're sitting for this year, getting things bought up. And when you look out in your field, if you can see that deficiency, that's something to keep in mind when we have those discussions for next year. I mean, a lot of times it's easy to just put the year that you had behind you and just do the same thing that you always done the next year, but that's how you end up starving out your ground. So it's very beneficial around this time to be out in your fields looking at if there's any deficiencies popping up, or being in communication with your agronomist on what fertility plans they may recommend. And even as we look to get the crop out, once you get that crop out, it's always a great time to soil sample. A lot of the time it ends up saving our customers money, because we're not putting out stuff over what doesn't need it.
That's all for this week's Crop Talk by IAS. Thanks for tuning in. If any of our listeners have questions, feel free to email them to croptalk@innovativeag.com. Be sure to like, follow, and subscribe so you don't miss next week's update. And if you know a fellow grower who'd value a quick field snapshot, share this episode with them. For more agronomy resources and to connect with your local IAS team, visit Innovative and follow Innovative Ag Services on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and LinkedIn. We'll catch you next week on Crop Talk.